Welcome to Reading Inspires by Reading is Fundamental. I'm your host, Dr. Erin Bailey. This podcast celebrates the power of books and the joy of reading. In each episode, we talk with educators, librarians, families, authors, and literacy champions to explore one big question: what does reading inspire for you? Through stories, research, and real world experiences from classrooms, libraries, and homes, we explore what literacy looks like and why it matters. Whether you're nurturing young readers, shaping learning spaces, or simply love a good book, we're glad you're here. Be sure to subscribe to get the latest episode. Let's get inspired. I'm very excited. This month is Mental Health Awareness Month, the month of May, and we are joined today by Jessica Jones White. Jessica and I go way back because we did teach together at the Inspired Teaching Demonstration School, where Jessica is now the assistant principal. She's also an education consultant for the Creation Gym, and she's a licensed graduate professional counselor. So she wears many hats. Jessica has also been a member of Reading is Fundamental's Middle School Family Literacy Advisory Board since 2022. She's done webinars for us. She's been so generous with her time and expertise. So welcome, Jessica.
Thank you. I'm so excited to do this today.
As I mentioned in that intro, you wear many hats: assistant principal, therapist, literacy advocate, content creator. Can you start by sharing a little bit about your personal journey? What first inspired your passion for connecting literacy to mental health?
Yeah, so I would say it's a personal one. I was the student who had a 504, who was the hyper kid in the class, who really zoned out in class with books. Like I would finish my work early and I would zone out with books. I think that I made a connection with books early just a place to escape, but also to learn that other people struggle and it's just not me. And so I think I mentioned all that to say I wind up going into the counseling realm and also education to keep kids from having experiences like I had. And so that's how I, even got into those two houses. And then to find out, a lot of the students that I talk to use books as a pathway to kind of escape reality for a moment and, dive into a good book. But also, it's also very useful in the clinical practices that we do. So, all those things married together, seeing what kids are going through in the classroom, knowing my own experience, and not wanting there to not be a pathway for success or for being understood or for getting the help you need. And all that added together to just be, an advocate for literacy. Yeah.
You are a strong advocate, and I am truly speaking from personal experience, having worked with you, Jessica, that I deeply appreciate when you bring your personal experiences into it. I think it builds so much empathy. It models for students what you want them to do. And so here's an example. I was the reading specialist. Jessica was a classroom teacher. And whenever I would get assigned a student, she would bring to me, like, here's what I'm noticing about them in the classroom. Here's what is going on at home that I've heard from their parents or that the child's told me. And I think what a lot of people don't think about is all of these things go into a child's literacy development. The dots might not be A to B, but in
Yeah.
fact, things that are happening at home in a child's life, or, maybe they feel so full of energy, they can't contain themselves sometimes. Like, all of these impact a child's ability to read and write.
100%. And it often correlates with access, right? So it's like, I find a lot of times, not all the time, not creating any stereotypes, but we find connections between families who need additional support and then being able to go to the library or pick up a brand new book or get them a used book or even sit down and say, okay, this is how you sound these words out. They're often working. They're often, trying to manage the home. And so, yeah, all those things, matter whether we see the direct paths to them or whether we find out through our experiences that they matter.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll link this below, but you recently did a webinar for Reading is Fundamental. Every book is a mental health book. Can you explain a little bit what you mean by that, and why is that message important for educators and families right now?
Yeah, so books are a lot like parallels to reality, just like movies and television shows. But the thing that books do differently is it doesn't create the image for you. You have to imagine those things on your own. There's some part of it that is a narrative, how you imagine what you're reading, and that's the narrative part of it. And with all of those things, when you have these parallels to reality, you're experiencing things. Much like if your friend tells you about they learned a lesson, they were riding their bike too hard down the hill and they skinned their knee. Okay, now you have learned from that person's reality, an experience or a lesson, and you take it with you. You might internalize it and maybe you might be wary of the hills, or you might just be careful going down the hill. Either way, once you have a opening to a reality that someone is existing in or experiencing, you can often empathize or picture how that matches, something you could experience, and then you learn from that. It's very similar to observational learning, and social learning. And a lot of people would say that's how most humans learn, socially. And so, um, all of those things come together when you're reading a book. It's very similar to talking to a friend about something they learned. And so when we open a book, especially when there's characters, whether it's a fiction book or a nonfiction book, it's usually people centered through characters or through the persons whose story is being told. So then we as humans relate to other humans. And it's an exceptional way to have kids have more experiences of a person's reality or a subject's reality, even it could be an animal, and learn through that or absorb it as as an experience of their own. And when used properly, it can actually accelerate a lot of wisdom, knowledge, and experience, emotional intelligence for the person who's reading it. And so that's how every book becomes a mental health book. And then there's this part of you with mental health being able to see how someone navigates those challenges, or see the consequences of actions, or see the output of a great effort. There's so many things you can experience. It also allows people to imagine how their life could look different for themselves. It evokes thoughts about change. It evokes thoughts about, well, how can I control my experience the same way this character or this subject did? And so there's that part of it as well, of like, being able to show people coping strategies or tools, or how to execute something differently that they could try in their own life without actually having to just be, testing it out for the first time themselves. Just like, here's this path. I've already laid it out for you. Now see if it fits for you. So there's that part of it as well. And so I see it as very multifaceted, but it's observing, learning through observation, learning that tools exist. And then there's also the part that's very structured, bibliotherapy, which is what I talk about in the webinar, which is having intentional learning experiences built to highlight those moments that subjects or characters are having in the story, and allowing the reader to take in and understand that they can take from this experience. So if they're not doing it on their own and coming to those conclusions on their own, or need some facilitation to come to those conclusions, you have like those bibliotherapy style moments where you're making these planned lessons around read alouds, around chapter reading, around novels and book studies, that allow there to be a pathway to create a structured environment so that you can learn from the tools you saw. You can pick up and think of your own tools. You can see the possibilities, and you can observe other people's reality. And, ultimately, if nothing else happens, you learn more of ways to empathize, because you learn more about other experiences.
I'm wondering too if you're just as you're describing this, are non-examples helpful too for this like observe and learn? Like if a child is reading and they see a character behaving in a way that they're like, I don't want to handle the situation that way, or I don't think that character handled that situation, the right way. Can they learn through that too?
Yeah, it's a part of social learning, it's part of observational learning. If it's not to like bring it into too much of a clinical realm, but like if there's a trial, if the mouse goes and gets the cheese and the tail gets snapped, all the other mice go, okay, we're not
Yeah.
going over there. And so this is very similar. They're observing someone else's reality, whether it's a positive reality or one where they're navigating trials and circumstances, but that is a learned experience. And for people who can access that type of learning on their own, great, read a book and learn. For people who maybe need some support or you want to be sure they've accessed that learning, you create some structured lessons or structured moments to make sure you build those connections. And what I like about what authors do is they typically make it really clear, depending on the developmental age, the outcomes of those, this didn't go so well type of experiences. Like our kids right now are reading Of Mice and Men, and they just like learn so much from George and Lenny, and like, okay, I'm not gonna do that to my friend. And they're able to observe how that ended for George and Lenny and in the, the outcomes, and then they're able to navigate it. So that's just an example of like, okay, maybe not so positive, but I still learned from observing how that could land. Even in a fictional realm, I talk about this all the time with kids who like superhero stories. We know that's fiction, but they learn a great deal
Hmm.
about making choices that impact a larger audience of people without considering them. They learn, okay, well, so and so superhero saved them from the building, but who's going to fix the building? They think about all of those things, and it's great to hear them come and talk to me about those things when we talk about what they're reading.
That was me. I was the kid who always wondered who's going to fix the building, or those movies where the parents go out of town and the teenagers destroy the house. I'm like, what's going to happen to the house? I'm not worried about I'm not worried about the
Okay.
consequences for the teens, but what is going to happen to the house? Who's going to clean that up? So I'm glad that they can address that too. And I'm sure there are also some children out there, I might include my own child in this, who just simply have to learn through experience. So maybe it's like
Yes.
rather than front loading the lesson, it's a hey, you learned this kind of the hard way. And here's now we're going to read a story. Here's a character that went through something similar. So at least you can see, you're not the only one who makes mistakes and learns through making mistakes.
Right. And you have those cathartic experiences where you're like, okay, I can totally relate to this character and what happened to them and those outcomes. And honestly, there's a lot of stories where, okay, this outcome happened to me, and I kind of got like the medium version, the mild version of what could have really happened.
Mm,
And so let me let you see the spicy version of where this could have went, had it not fallen in your favor. There's also
yeah.
that.
That's a great point too. So I love the word bibliotherapy. It's a new word, but when you explain it, it makes so much sense. Many teachers and parents out there, they're already doing this without realizing it. What does bibliotherapy look like in everyday classrooms and homes?
Yeah, so everyday classrooms and homes, bibliotherapy looks like your read aloud, your bedtime story, your if you're reading a family novel together, you're sitting down, you're reading the family novel. For me and my family, it was like nighttime Bible stories, and we're sitting down and we're learning from whatever happened to the characters. So that's what it looks like in your community spaces. It looks like your Saturday library read alouds that your librarians might do, or book clubs that your kids might be involved in, or like the community library where people check it out and write a little note in the back. Although those are less structured, if your community puts in a structured time to discuss the book and talk about the access of empathy and emotional experiences, or even what the characters are learning, they're essentially doing some version of developmental bibliotherapy.
That's great. And I know like the idea of every book is a mental health book and bibliotherapy is that truly you can use any books for it. But do you have any recommendations of what educators or families might look for in books to be very intentional about teaching emotional regulation, empathy, identity development, any of the kind of SEL
Yeah.
concepts?
Yeah, it's all about the pre-read or sourcing your material with other lists that are like identified for social emotional learning. And so there's a lot of you know, uh companies, publishers who create social emotional collections and then list them and then talk about which avenues those books, best address, or there's also like schools that do the same things. Clinical spaces might have lists and recommendations, and often sometimes libraries. And so you can source like a book through a collection that's being presented, or you can do like a pre-read. So, you go to your local bookstore. There's a section on heroes and journeys, and you really want your kid to learn like perseverance may result in success or may not result in success, but it's more about the journey of perseverance and what you learn from it. Cool. You find your hero's journey book, you read the back of a couple of them, and you decide to like screen it, essentially, or we can use our good old Spark Notes and other things that exist. I don't know. I'm dating myself because I don't even know if people use Spark Notes anymore. But you screen the book essentially, and then you decide what is it that you got from it yourself, and if you can create that experience for your kid or your student, that same parallel experience that you had yourself when you screened the book. For educators like pre-K and to upper elementary who are reading picture books, screen it, read it fully, digest it, take a moment to say, if I was a student reading this, what calls out to me and what do I need to call out that's right below the surface? Make your little sticky notes as you read, like, oh, this is great for bringing in body language because there's a good illustration of body language, or this is really great for empathy because this character talks in detail about how it like, changed them or impacted them internally. So screening and looking at pre-screen collections, similar to the ones that Riff has as well.
Yes, I will certainly link below. RIF does have a wellness center. And what we've done on that center is we've analyzed the top social emotional learning curriculums used in the US, and then we've pulled out the major concepts and attached book lists to each of those concepts. So if you don't know where to start in your journey of pairing read alouds with your SEL curriculum, this is a great place to start. And I will be sure to link that below for you all. Um, but what I got from that was do not just cold read a book, like screen it first. And the sticky notes, I love that. And I think kids kind of like it too. I used to do that as a teacher, just right, maybe it was a question or a prompt or a vocabulary word that I was going to teach on that page. And then you have those students that it helps them. They see the sticky note coming up and they're like, oh, what's she going to ask me on this page? Or what kind of vocabulary word are we going to learn about on this page? So I think it's good for those kind of visual learners too, that it prompts them that something's coming up on this page.
And it's also an emotional primer, right? So if it's something that's heavy and you're discussing it throughout the book, each time the sticky note comes, you might have a conversation about something. So yeah.
That's a great point too. What do you recommend for books, the way you just said, that may feel heavy? Like, what's a great way for either families or educators to let students know that it could be a heavy topic for them before reading that book?
Yeah, so I recommend co-regulation openers and content previews. So a co-regulation opener is just helping you, the reader, or the person who's going to digest the material, be in their body and be aware of how they're feeling prior to it. And so it may just be some 478 box breathing, a couple, mindful breaths, a moment of silence, those type of co-regulation spaces. And what makes it co-regulation is the reader does it and the person experiencing the read does it as well. That modeling and that dual experience, if you will, helps to, and there's lots of research on co-regulation, helps to kind of create a baseline before you enter this emotional experience or before you enter the story, if you will. And then the content preview is a primer that helps you to know what you are preparing yourself for and what you're about to enter. And so doing a co-regulation and content preview is going to be a good foundation for a story that is going to possibly bring some things out for a student. Even if it's happiness, right? Okay, we know what joy in the classroom looks like. We like to be loud, we love it. But if there's going to be a page that's super exciting, you might want to preview that. Like, there's a surprise, there's a pop-out page, there's a this or that. Be ready, and we're going to do silent claps, or we're going to, to just get them ready for those moments, whether they're highs or lows.
Do you ever feel like, so I'm going back to when I was a first grade teacher, and it's like you plan this beautiful read aloud, you're going to do it, but then everyone comes back from recess. And even with some kind of co-regulation, I did rainbow breathing or balloon breath, where the energy is just not right. And you're like, I don't like, even though I had this planned, I don't think we're ready to tackle this heavy topic right now. And like, let me change it up and do a silly read aloud instead to match the mood of the class.
Yeah, that's where like your restorative chats or working with your school counselor comes in, but also like your demonstration of like discernment. So like
Mm,
okay, we did the content preview, and in my content preview, I'm asking kids, are we ready to open the book? And I'm getting some kids saying, no, I'm not ready to open the book. You might then say, okay, class, let's choose another book together, and then you get something lighter, something, even if it's like, even if you have like what I really recommend is have like a go-to book that helps kids get to baseline. Like
hmm.
there's lots of books on mindfulness, on belly breathing, on all those things that feel very neutral that you can like pivot to if during your content preview you don't get the response you want. And so say you read the book and the content preview went fine, the kids are like, yeah, we got this. And then after that, they're like, we don't have this. We're in tears. We just, this was a lot. The kids, when they finished reading, I think it was House on Mango Street, everybody had their feelings about it. And so there, we held space and like, if you need to talk to a school counselor, if you need to talk to a trusted adult just about how you're having feelings right now, we can make that space for it. If we need to stop and journal how we're feeling and get it out on paper, we can make space for it. Overall, you just have to be ready for the pivot and have discernment of the space. You can also survey the space. Like, friends, I want you to just draw on a sticky note emoji that expresses how you're feeling after this reading. And then that can be also a closer. The other thing is like when you close a book, you do want to use a co-regulation closer as well. And so that same way that you open the door to enter a vulnerable space, you want to return to safety and close that door with a co-regulation closer. And so in having that door open and close at the beginning and the end, that's also another opportunity to get feelers. If you feel the vibes in the room or you're looking at the faces and you're like, part of your co-regulation closer could be draw an emoji on your post-it how you're feeling right now. Pass that to me. This is for me and my eyes only. And then we're going to take some deep breaths. And so that way you have like an exit ticket, if you will, an idea of how that's going. You could even do that if it's like a story at night before you go to bed. Draw on the sticky, give it to mommy. She's going to look at it or give it to whoever is reading it, right? And so those are some of the tools that you could use to get back from recess. Vibes aren't feeling good. You have that restorative chat. Hey, class, let's circle up real quick. All right, so we've got I saw some happy faces, some sad faces, and some okay faces in our emojis. We went to recess, and then I feel a lot of sad energy or a lot of low energy as we come back. And I want to make sure we're all okay. I want to open the floor for whoever wants to share. If no one wants to share, this is okay. We can sit in silence. Sometimes silence alone helps us feel better. And you sit in that circle, you try to restore the space. There's not a particular person you're restoring with, but there's the class restoring that space and returning to safety.
I love that. And then do you feel like it's a good opportunity to involve families too, to just send a note on, your Google Classroom or whatever you use that's like, hey, we read The Boy with the Big Feelings, the Big Feelings today, and we talked about big feelings. Like just a heads up, maybe ask your child about it when they get home or something like that.
Yes, 100%. Like if your school uses weekly update, like our school has a weekly update where we preview what's happening the next week. That's a perfect spot for that. Or if you have like a class dojo or dean's list or some type of profile where you can text families, sending a quick text like, hey, this is a book we read. It may be hard. And you may want to have a conversation to continue their learning at home or just kind of decompress how they received it. We like when we read books like The Hate You Give, or when they watch movies in conjunction with their curriculum, like 42, the Jackie Robinson story, we usually send permission slips and things like that home to say, can this, do you want them to opt out of this experience? Is there a reason for them to opt out of this experience? And that's another way you can like do a content preview with families. There's the reactive part of, hey, we did this. And there's the content preview part of like update, we're doing this, or permission, we're doing this.
Mm.
So that way there's some autonomy on what you want your, child to experience in their curricular experiences, but also how we as family members or as the supportive community can help make sure that the intention for the engagement with that particular media is where it's supposed to be.
Yeah, I love that and I appreciate it so much. Involving families to every degree possible, but not just reactive, but proactive as well. Speaking of families, I know this is kind of everywhere right now, and I've written about this topic, like reading for pleasure at home, families reading to their children is really at an all-time low. And a lot of experts relate it to screen time, the increases of screen time. Can you share a little bit what has been your experiences with that and how can what are the implications for increased screen time and how can families help children rediscover reading joy in a screen saturated world?
Yeah, and I'll say something maybe a little bit provocative, but it's screen time on both sides. We're seeing families on their screens more
Oh
and reading
yeah.
to their kids less because they're working, they're handling business. And then there's less opportunities for families to be open and available to engage in the work that they want to do with their kids. Not because they don't want to or they don't care, but because of the limitations right now for society calls for more work or more things to do. And then on the other side with the kids, actually, the screen battle is tremendous. And as a clinician, I see it more of a battle of entertainment than screens.
Mm,
Um, in particular, like screens is the form, the medium in which it's being presented, but overall, it's constant entertainment. I want this constant injection of dopamine from this little 30-second video I watched or this YouTube short and the fact that we are conditioning brains to be constantly
mhm,
entertained and constantly looking for dopamine is creating this hunger, like internally, for entertainment. And the easiest form of guaranteed entertainment is self-selected things on a screen. You know that when you go to your favorite YouTuber's video, you're going to be entertained. You know when you swipe and scroll and swipe and scroll and like photos, you're going to be entertained. And so you have this surefire way to get that dopamine release or that satisfaction of entertainment. With a book, people who read books, we know how that goes. It may be hit or miss. You might read a really, really great book and be like, oh, that was excellent. And then you might get two chapters into a book and you're like, oh, that was disappointing. I thought it was going to be better. And so there's that, but then there's also like everything everything is connected. If there's less time to engage in literacy and you have a less context rich environment where you are looking at print and you're looking at words and images, if that environment reduces, your engagement with books reduces, in turn your ability to interact with literary medias are going to be limited as well. So your development in reading is also going to be impacted. And then that impacts your ability to be entertained with a book. If I can't digest and understand what the author is sharing with me, I'm not receiving that same amount of entertainment where when I have this audiovisual presentation, it's much easier to access. And so there are several ways I see this problem being solved as making reading and the ability to be able to read and digest, text more accessible and um, having families understand the impact of the early years and formative years, how important it
mm.
is for books to be accessible, and that includes the ability to digest them and letting that be the stepping stone to pleasure reading. Because if I cannot picture that movie in my brain while I'm reading,
Mhm.
or if I can't connect with the characters because I'm not comprehending what's written, it is hard for me to buy into or want to continue to engage with this experience. And so at the baseline, it becomes we make sure kids can read. We make sure kids can read very early in life and then we connect them with texts that they find entertaining, which the last part is the easiest part. There's a topic for everybody.
Oh yeah.
It is how do I get you excited about reading and how do I get you to be able to read?
Yeah, I've shared that before on this podcast. There's no such thing as somebody who's not interested in reading. They just haven't found the right book yet. There are no non-readers out there. They truly just need to be connected. with the right book, a book that resonates with them. But it's interesting too the way you're describing it, because my understanding is when you're scrolling and looking at videos, there is an algorithm then that takes in exactly what you've spent a longer amount of time on and then feeds you more of that. And to your point, like books don't do that. It at least right now they don't. I know there's some, algorithms out there that help people shopping online for books like you might like this, but certainly it's not happening instantaneously the way that it is when you're scrolling on your phone. So I wonder if it is that like we've entered a phase where everything is just too instant and at our fingertips, and reading requires a slowing down that we are
Yeah.
not like hardwiring our brains to be able to do now.
Yes. Our society as a whole struggles with delayed gratification. That yeah, it's a society-wide issue. I just remember being a kid in the 90s and going on road trips from Virginia to New York, and all you had was yourself and a book. There was no phone, there was no videos. This was before you had like the TVs in the car. It was just you, the road, and a book maybe. And those were your choices for entertainment. And you had your imagination. You'd be telling your own story, or you'd be digesting another one. Now there's so many options for entertainment at any time in any place. It's just constantly accessible. So not only is it I'm being entertained, but I'm being entertained when I want to be entertained.
Hmm.
There is no delay to that to feeling fulfilled if I'm given open access to those things. And so it's really about striking a balance and prioritizing their development and their ability to use their imagination, their ability to have delayed gratification, to exercise, whatever patience they may have. Excuse me. And that might look different on every developmental level. When we opened, I talked about how I was the kid who I needed something to do. I needed something in my hand. And so my ability to, entertain myself or, read a book and have that stamina for reading, which is a whole nother topic, that reading stamina may be different than a more neurotypical person. But if I'm working with my family and my family has learned about my styles and my capacity and reading and things like that, they can tailor that to something that is obtainable. And so can classroom teachers and things like that. You might need to chunk it. You read for 15 minutes, you draw
Hmm.
for 15
Hmm.
minutes. There's ways to do it so that it's appropriate for the developmental level of the student. And then there's audiobooks as well as like a way of, co-reading. I would always say put the audiobook on, but also read the words, if possible, if that's something that you need to like accommodate or to add to the experience, if there's like fun voices and things like that.
E- Everything you said resonated so much with me, Jessica. And I love the example of the road trip because when I was probably around the same age as you, I did a road trip with my grandparents from Arizona, where I live, to North Dakota, where they live. I mean, that's several states, right?
Yes.
Um, and before we went on the road trip, we went to the library. And back then they had like these plastic bags and in the that were hanging on this rack, and in the bag was the book and the cassette tape. And my goodness, I listened to the Velveteen Rabbit so many times on that on that trip. But I think what I learned from that trip, and it's something that I use my entire life and I used as a teacher and now as a parent, is what my grandpa called the big P. And the big P stood for patience.
Yeah.
Anytime I seemed like I was getting a little impatient, he would say, like, you got to have the big P. And the joke of my family is at one point I was like, Grandpa, I'm losing the big P back here. Say that. But I think,
Yes.
like, to your point, it's not just children that need to learn patience, and this might not be very popular, and for parents who are listening, take this from a place of love. It's parents that need more patience too, because so many times we put a screen in front of our child because we are losing our patience. And I'm not saying you should never do that, but I'm a literacy expert and I see all the time parents and children in um, shopping carts on devices, watching videos, and walking around the mall, pushing their child in a stroller, watching videos. And there are so many wonderful real world opportunities to talk to your child, to boost their language and their vocabulary development and set them up for success. And unfortunately, if you stick a screen in front of your child, you are losing those opportunities.
Yeah. Yeah, it's being used as a regulation tool when co-regulation can replace that in some instances. Like especially if you have siblings, like you two go play this game, or
Hmm.
you have this amount of time to do this. And that requires it does require some planning at times. There are some things you can do, just heat of the moment, but it does require a little bit of planning sometimes. I say all that to say though, and not in a not empathetic way, because I this is no statements can ever be blanket, but this happened for parents when there weren't screens. Like when screens weren't a thing, everybody had to figure out a way to create space for regulation, entertainment, etc. And so in you approaching how you manage your family or how you manage situations, instead of being the default approach, I can manage with the screen, let the default approach be what would I do if screens didn't exist? How would I
Mm,
manage this moment? And then use the screen as like a secondary tool if that first tool doesn't work. If, like if you have to use it, that's what, I would say. Like my nephew has autism. We totally understand that like he is able to co-regulate with the iPad very well. Like we know that that's going to happen. But we also know that we don't want that to always be the primary tool, not for him, because we want him to have access to multiple coping strategy skills and tools, but also for us because one, iPads die, two, he can't be on the iPad all day at school. So we
mhm,
want to, set them up set for success for multiple environments. And so like our first step is to say like, okay, we're going to this pumpkin patch. The hay is about to be a sensory overload. The sound is going to be a sensory overload. We got to figure out how to approach this pumpkin patch. Okay, the pumpkin patch has a playground. Okay, so we're going to do 20 minutes of this, and then we're going to go to the playground for free time. Okay, and then we're going to, eat at the cafe, but one of the parents are going to eat at the cafe early so they can take him to the playground. So while everybody else is eating, he doesn't have to sit at the table. There's some hoops you have to jump through sometimes. But like there is, if there is a possibility to use some type of other method, then try to employ it as much as you can. But in no way are we, judging parents who don't. I get that parents have their own sensory capacities
mhm.
and their own capacities for what they can do, especially if they're working at the same time. But if your default is screen, try to readjust to my default is the 90s. And what would I do then?
Yes. What would I do in the 90s? I love that. I will say coloring books, a very underrated tool for calming down and just doing something. It's good for fine motor skills
Yes.
as well. So for educators who are listening, that was families. For educators who are listening who might feel overwhelmed by academic pressures and student mental health needs, what is one simple literacy practice you hope that they take away from you today?
What I have such a hard time with picking one, so I'm gonna give two.
Sure.
The first literacy practice is a hook or engagement or opener to any lesson can be a literary experience. I would be hard pressed to find a principal or an instructional coach out there who's like, no, your hook cannot be reading an excerpt from a story with the kids or reading a book. I used to teach math at the middle school level, and we used to read the miscalculations of, and I can't remember the rest of the title, but it was of, I think it was Lightning Girl. Yeah, the
Yeah.
miscalculation of Lightning Girl. And that was our read aloud. We opened the class with it. The kids were like so into like infinite numbers and pi and all these different things from the story, and understood that person's struggle with math, but also her acceleration with math. And so I say all that to say you can engage um, group reading, read alouds, reading excerpts, even if it's a quote. Quotes are very powerful literary tools, especially because you have to do a lot of like inferencing
Mm,
and trying to figure out what the author meant. Even if it's a quote, you can inject it in your day somewhere. Having a content-rich environment is going to a context-rich environment is going to be the next thing. Your word wall, the anchor charts, the things that you have up around your room. Okay, cool. I don't have time for a literary moment in class. My space should be print rich, and allow kids to visually engage with words that relate to the content that you're teaching. And so those would be the two things. Like there's a way. Like there's always a way if you work with your, instructional coach or your leader and, try to find something that fits your class. And then yeah, you can model joy from reading and those read alouds and those moments where you look at quotes and things like that. You're essentially modeling how to engage with reading and just, there's ways to make it entertaining. You do a jigsaw, you give every group a different quote, or you do a read aloud and you put on the fun voices. There's ways that you can model that reading is entertaining and that also you can leave with a lesson from it. And so those are the things I would say. I know that's way more than one, but I don't know how
No,
to be a one gal.
I mean, your example is perfect because before Jessica was the assistant principal for the middle school, she was a middle school math teacher. And here she was still using read alouds, having anchor charts, having a word wall, integrating social emotional learning into math. Like that is how you create a literacy rich experience for students. So I think
Yeah.
I think it's perfect. So I could talk to you all day. But I do always end by asking guests, what does reading inspire for you?
Yes. For me, reading inspires change. Um, there's so much power in understanding the reality of others, and helping it to make sense with your own personal reality. But also there's so much power in understanding that in some ways, stick with me here. Realities are in some ways infinite, And so
Yeah.
there's always a new book, there's always a new story, there's always a new possibility. And when you engage with, observing all of them through reading these stories, you can also expand your own belief and horizons and what imagination and possibility can do for you, and it inspires change. And so, if anything, I really truly believe that narratives help change to happen, whether they be fictional or true. And digesting that, is very powerful. And the other thing is change in one's knowledge and ability. One of my main pillars of my personal education philosophy is if I teach a child to be able to conduct research, I've essentially taught them how to teach themselves. There's like I'm teaching you
Mm.
how to research and I'm helping you learn how you learn. If I can do those two things, I have essentially kind of put myself out of work as a teacher and have empowered them to self-educate. And that's something that, that's something you can't destroy ever. You know how to access this information. You know how you learn best. Go get whatever you want to know. And so that's what literacy is for me.
I love that, Jessica. Reading inspires change and change makers. Thank you so much, Jessica. It was wonderful having you.
Yes, same, likewise. I'm so excited to always work with you, and thanks for giving me this opportunity.
Thank you for listening to Reading Inspires by Reading is Fundamental. I hope today's conversation sparked new ideas, meaningful connections, and a renewed love of reading. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to subscribe, share it with a fellow literacy champion, and join us next time as we continue exploring what reading inspires.